Francis, who's been unable to construct an excuse for their actions?
Carillion, is it? There's been a devastating report from 2 House of Commons select committees into Carillion's downfall. They basically, well, they blame lots of people, but they do blame the board. They say that even when disaster was staring them in the face and they were about to go bust, all the directors cared about was sorting out their bonuses. Never mind the 2 billion of unpaid bills to suppliers and contractors and 800 million pension fund liabilities and all the rest of it. And the chairman, rather wonderfully, who comes in for a lot of criticism, is called Philip Green. And he's not even that Philip Green. It turns out there's sort of an army of little mini-me Philip Greens who are going around boardrooms wreaking havoc in his name. And this Philip Green, joyfully, was previously David Cameron's advisor on boardroom responsibility. It blames them and it blames the regulators because they were supine and passive and basically having a siesta throughout the whole thing. And the big 4 accountancy firms, they're the other big villains of this thing because they've established a kind of monopoly, the 4 of them. And because they're also consultants as well as auditors, they basically get it from both ends. So in the case of Carillion, KPMG signed off their accounts very questionably. And then I think it was Deloitte were brought in as consultants on some strategy or other. And then I think Ernst & Young came in when things started going pear-shaped to talk about relaunch and salvage operations and things, and that didn't work. So when they finally went bust, the one of the 4 big accountancy firms that hadn't got its check was PricewaterhouseCoopers. But never mind, because they were then the only big one able to come in without conflict of interest, so they were then hired by the official administrator as consultants. So they then got their check as well. So I think between them, they got about 72 million quid out of there. And they, unlike the £2 billion worth of contractors with their unpaid bills, they, I believe, will get every penny. And I mean, they've completely trashed the public sector and all. I mean, they did so many things. These firms, a bit like Crapita, they had this weird collection of jobs, everything from, building prisons to supplying school dinners, which you think were slightly different skills, but anything that involves public sector money in enormous quantities going into their piggy bank, they will happily do, even if they're no good at it, and even if they don't actually know how to add up the sums, and even if they're bankrupting all their employees and the public sector.
I'm just a bit jealous that there are high-rolling accountants, because mine's quite lacklustre in comparison to that lot. I mean, I just give him a carrier bag full of receipts and he keeps me out of prison, and that's all that happens. But no, it'll all happen with all the other, because they've all got, stupid I mean, as Francis says, Carillion is actually a number that's 1 million times what any sane person would think they're worth. But mostly they have names like Snouts in Trophia and things like that. But no, I mean, so much of the public sector is just hurling money at these people. It's all Blair's fault. Blair thought it was a great... John Major sort of came up with it as a half idea, and Blair just ran with it, because it involved posh people being rich, and that was kind of...
Yes, why couldn't Blair have run with one of John Major's other ideas, like the Cones hotline?
Yeah, exactly.
The report from Frank Field's committee and Rachel Reeves's committee, it's full of good stuff. I mean, I suspect Frank Field came up with this phrase. He said it was brought down by recklessness, hubris and greed. The scansion of that is so beautiful. It sort of,
sounds like a much more plausible title for a firm of accountants than the one they actually
have. It is actually a firm of city lawyers. I've come across them. I've been threatened by them occasionally in the past.
He described it as greed on stilts, which I thought, that sounds like a really weird capitalistic circus troupe, doesn't it? Sort of...
They were stuffing their mouths with gold. So he gets a bit carried away occasionally, I think, Frank Field, when he's doing this report. Yeah, he was so thrilled because he did the last Philip Green, Sir Philip Green report. So every year, another Philip Green pops up and Frank Field has to do another report.
I mean, Simon, I know that you see the good in everyone. Do you think the findings are fair?
Am I allowed to use the word on radio?
The jury's out yet, because you haven't yet made it clear who it's directed at, Simon.
Well, actually, I think I would probably direct it more at the big 4. They should be the target of the reform. If you release capitalist rats into the sort of environment in which they're able to commit these sort of atrocities, we've surely learnt by now they will do so. The idea that they would use any kind of what we would recognise as human morality in order to determine the correct course of action is nonsense. We need proper checks and balances. KPMG are public enemy number one in this. Even the name sounds like a metric used in a video game to determine how many kills per minute you've managed to achieve or something. They are evil personified. They break it up, they evade capture. They've had the job for 19 years. They signed it off with the clean bill of health about 2 months before the first of the major seams burst, spilling poison, and it's absolutely absurd. And it's worth mentioning, incidentally, these are the people of whom Michael Gove said we had had about enough under the guise of experts and how we chortled because they had contributed reports saying what damage Brexit would do. Well, this is exactly the reason that people have no faith in the major financial bodies that are supposed to be running the country.
I mean, you think what fat cats get away with, and then when I submit my accounts every bus ticket is accounted
Exactly.
for.
I'm not even allowed
this
to
was
claim
going to
broadband.
an
It's
audition,
absurd.
and that's £2.30. You know, it's the little man has to give an account of himself so accurately. Yet these people are getting away with so much, so much.
One thing I liked was they had an arrangement which was managed for them by Santander, whereby they would they had a take-it-or-leave-it approach to suppliers who would have to wait 120 days to be paid. 120 days of Sodom, basically. And they could escape that outcome only by accepting worse terms. If they wanted to be paid any sooner than that, they could renegotiate a lower price, which presumably they'd already negotiated down to the bone anyway, during which, of course, Philip Green has bought another yacht.
Claude Coburn, the journalist of yesteryear, when he was quite broke and living in Ireland, was bombarded with final reminders of various bills of a Carillion sort. And he had this standard letter he'd send back to them saying, "Dear sir, you don't seem to understand the system on which I pay my bills. When you send me the first reminder, it goes into a basket. And once a year, I stir the basket with a stick and I take out 4 bills and pay them. Any more letters from you and you're out of the game."
I'm feeling a bit sorry for capitalism now. I mean, I've always been quite critical, but it seems everyone's really piling in at this point, and everyone's so hostile to the accountancy firms and the banks. I mean, I feel sorry for the big banks because they're now having to compete with the ones that give out free food, and they don't get enough credit for creating the conditions in which those food banks are able to thrive.
This is the Select Committee report into the collapse earlier this year of outsourcing firm Carillion. Carillion's directors have been accused of recklessness, hubris and greed, surprising those of us who thought they were simply big-hearted dreamers who were only guilty of looking for love in all the wrong places. If you think that those involved will truly be held to account, you're mistaken. These chaps will no doubt be listening to this episode on the BBC World Service while topping up their tans, seemingly unaware that the staff at the Barbados Hilton are pissing in their carver and rubbing their balls on the Eggs Benedict. There are calls for the Big Four auditors to be broken up, but no news on whether phone lines will be set up to deal with the thousands of teenage girls who'll be devastated should G leave KPMG. The problem is that as soon as somebody introduces themselves as an auditor, absolutely everybody loses interest. That's certainly the case at dinner parties and, as it turns out, during the course of an audit. Meanwhile, there's still no word on who caused the collapse of Maplin's. For those of us who are left with a £20 gift card and no means of exchanging it for a SCART lead, the fight for justice goes on. Still, you can say what you want about the bosses of Carillion, because they're bastards. 2 points to Francis.